Hi, everybody that's here. We'll start in a few minutes. I just want to write down everybody's name that's here right now for the attendance. I heard from a couple of people that are going to be late, but I just took off that waiting room feature because that causes people to get bumped out when we're in share screen mode on my side. So if they drop in, then that will be fine. And I've also changed the security so you guys can hopefully, we'll try it, share your screen if that's easier than looking back in the discussions to look at the work that you want to show. So in just a couple minutes, we'll do that. Okay, and in the meantime, before we start, I was just wondering, how are you doing in your other classes with Zoom? Are you almost all taking Zoom classes and nothing else, or do you have a mixture?
I have all Zoom classes, so
How many?
I'm taking 5 classes right now.
Wow. So do you
Yeah.
find you have more time? How is it different than taking a mixed, I mean, a regular semester? Do you find with the learning, the
I
time?
mean, it's definitely going better than last year because obviously
Okay.
lockdown happened after spring break. That was a lot. But
Yeah,
I feel like because I could plan ahead and like I live very close. I live in Rainham, so my commute would be like 15 minutes at most. But I find even like being able to wake up like just a half an hour before class instead of having to wake up earlier, it gives me so much more time to work and like get myself situated. So it's actually been kind of helpful. But I do miss, physically being in class and being able to like work with the professor one-on-one.
do you find like you're more or less motivated using, are you mostly using Blackboard or?
Yeah, mostly Blackboard.
Mhm.
Yes and no. I don't know. I feel like I would pass in a lot of stuff on Blackboard anyway,
Okay,
but yeah, I find that it's a lot easier for things to kind of slip through the cracks, when you're not physically handing something in.
right.
So I'm using my calendar a lot more than usual.
Yeah. Anybody else? I mean, is there anybody else that's fine? I mean, I agree with you about the commute time makes a huge difference, but then there's the opposite in computer time. I mean, there's more planning, but yeah, this class was a lot of, on Blackboard too. So I just wanted to make sure everything was working. Is anybody taking asynchronous classes where you're not having a regular class meeting?
I
Okay.
am.
So how is that going? And how do you feel about that? Opposed to meeting on a regular basis on Zoom?
Um, it's a little difficult, but it's just like the scheduling part.
Uh-huh.
Um, but it's just like every it's just every time like I have it, it's just like hard to keep up with. So
Okay, so you mean planning for
yeah,
the asynchronous and then, yeah, I can understand that. I mean, do you get weekly reminders or how does that kind of,
I don't know myself. Just like
okay,
I try to look good.
okay. It's interesting. I mean, I'm just curious for the future planning. So, um, okay. So is anybody having trouble with this week's assignment? And if there's anything that you're having frustration with, what would that be so we can go over that in Photoshop?
After you place an item, like I know how to like move it, but to like resize and tilt, um, I I think you might have gone over it last week, but
Okay, we'll go through that. That's,
yeah.
yeah. Let me just write that down so I don't forget. Yeah, I mean, with Photoshop, there's so much to the program. You kind of have to practice and practice and practice and go over things multiple times. So no problems at all. If you want to repeat something as many times as you need it, that's fine since we moved through it so quickly during the semester.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it's fast going through this program. It could take a couple semesters really picking it apart, but we have to go to Illustrator and then video. So yeah, anybody else with something that you want repeated or something you're having a problem with when you're trying to build your collage?
For my collage, every time like I put the picture, it just and then when I want to like erase some of the pictures from behind and show the background, it just won't do it for me. So like I'm just like really upset, and I
Oh no, okay.
how we gonna
Do you have your computer? We might try sharing your screen so we can, give you suggestions.
Okay, yeah, I have my computer.
Okay, whenever
I
you're,
taking my PC, so I
okay.
just 1 minute.
Yeah, I mean, maybe we'll just do that first because it can be frustrating in class, but there's always somebody next to you that'll have one way of doing it that might help. And then, if I'm talking to somebody else, that helps. And then I can get to more people. So this can be, I knew it would be frustrating. So don't worry that, if you're having, taking more time to sort of get through this program or running into barriers like that, it's very hard to, kind of pick apart the technical problems on an email. So if you want to try sharing your screen, let's see if we can do that. If not, I'll just share my screen on Photoshop and see if we can
It's
pick
gonna
it
take
through.
a while because it's loading right now.
Okay. So anybody else, while we're waiting, have any problems or anything that you want demonstrated? Or anything in particular with the assignment that you're finding frustrating or inspired by? It doesn't have to be just frustration, or because we'll look at the comments and some of the examples that we had come in to the discussions in a few minutes. But okay, I think while we're waiting for Wendy's computer, I'll share the screen for Photoshop real quick and just go through what might be a solution for that. So you're trying to get the backgrounds to disappear behind the image that's on top, is that, or erase into them? That's the thing that's the issue? Oh, I think so. I think that's what he said. While he's working on his computer, we'll do this. So, oops. And there's a couple things that can be, but usually it's just because, and that's the most confusing thing about Photoshop when you first start using it. Okay. So here's an image I was going to use for just an informal demonstration today. I use Photoshop a lot for composing images to work from that I'm going to do a painting from. I'm not as concerned about the perfection of the edges or the shadows. I just want to make it look like the composition will work for me to paint from, because I do like that that's another aspect of Photoshop that I really love, is that you can do this. If I was trying to compose on a canvas or even from a drawing, it's not as clear as to what things are to work from. And then on the canvas, I can go over it and it starts to get lumpy and it starts to get distorted. So I really, with the newest paintings I'm working on, want a really clean, smooth finish. So I want to have something that's pretty close to what I want to have on my finished painted work without directly transferring it. So I make these collages in Photoshop, which saves time, it helps with clarity, but I'm layering things together that don't belong together and going for a semi-surrealist look, but I'm not as worried about the edges, more the composition, and that the lighting is consistent throughout, so it looks like things belong together in this artificial world. So this isn't finished. I just brought up some pieces of an image that I was working on. So here's a deer on top of this background. So let's see. I think I'll place one more image behind it and then we can look at erasing that underneath the deer. Because I have masks on some of the others. Okay, so sometimes will have these houses, sort of house shapes or house silhouettes butting into the composition, just the idea of nature being forced out by the exponential growth of human habitation. So one thing you want to watch if you're putting in a new layer is that you hit return. And I think we sorted that out last week, but remember to hit return, or I'm not sure what it is on a PC, maybe it's alt return, sorry, but you want to just place that, confirm it with the keystroke, make sure that it's, you know, a placed object, and then you can move it around in the layer stack. So right now, this is above, sitting on top of my deer, and I want it behind. So I'm just clicking on the word, the name of that layer, which is house, and this is the chosen layer, because it's light, it looks different than the other layers. You can tell I clicked on it to select it. So I'm going to click, hold, and drag that underneath the deer, and so that pops up underneath it now. So Wendy is trying to erase. So I'm going to temporarily turn off the deer layer so I can see. So I'm just clicking once on that little eyeball icon, and that will just turn it off and on. And I just want it temporarily off so I can focus on the house layer. So one thing that might be the problem here is that the house layer is still a smart object. I placed it from the internet, which gives me a higher quality image, the largest possible size it can be from the source that I pulled it from. And you can tell that because it's got this little square within a square in the corner. And that's telling me that that's still a smart object. It's not really considered a bitmapped image that Photoshop can work with. It's kind of something between a vector and a bitmap. But I need to go up to layer and rasterize. That turns it into a bitmap. Rasterizing is just referring to a grid form smart object. So when I look at my layer again that's selected with the house in it, now it's behind the deer. It's also not a smart object any longer. That little square is gone. So that smart object would prevent you from erasing. So if you didn't go up to layer, rasterize smart object, then it would keep you from erasing, and that can be extremely frustrating. That happens at, you know, at the beginning of every semester, because that's a confusing thing about Photoshop. Another thing might be that you have part of the image selected. So I'll just go in and start to erase around the house and make sure that's working. So here's the erase tool. And I'm picking kind of a large soft edged brush because I want to get rid of some of the sky and everything else around the house. I just want the house to kind of blend into the background. So I'm going to go a little bit larger and then turn the opacity down to about 50 so it's not such a dramatic effect. But I have to go in with more brush strokes over and over the edge that is cut. But as I get closer to the house, I'll probably go over it less because I just want it to blend into the background. So it's working. But if I had selected a little part of the object before, say with the lasso tool, sometimes you'll do that inadvertently and it's so small you can't see it. That would prevent me from using the erase tool. The only place that it would allow me to erase now is within that little area. So if something in Photoshop's not working, a lot of times it's because you have a little area selected. And I'm just going to go to Command D to deselect that to free up the rest of the image. If something's selected, it just wants to affect what's inside that selected area, and now it's free, I can work on it. I could also go up to the pull down menu for selection and say deselect, and it would do the same thing if you don't want to use the keystroke. So one of those two things could be it. The other thing, the third thing could be that you don't have the right layer selected. If I'm trying to, erase the house and the bird layer up here is selected in my layer stack, and you can tell that because it's a lighter gray. Now when I try to erase the house, it's not going to do a thing because the bird layer is selected and I can only affect the bird layer. When I go up there, yeah, I'm erasing it, but it's not going to affect anything else in the image. So you want to check those three things, make sure that your smart object is taken off by going to layer, rasterize smart object. You want to make sure there's not a little bit selected that might be holding up the rest of the image. And then you want to make sure you have the right layer selected. So if you're still having problems after this, we'll look at your screen. There we are. But I hope that helps. It's probably one of those things, and it's just, you know, one of those confusing things that happens in Photoshop when you first start working on it. It has so many specifications for how to do things. So is anybody else having an issue with Photoshop?
I just have a question.
Sure.
So I realize that like you have to turn off smart object to make it like workable, but could you give an example of why you would want to leave that on? Like, is there a particular reason, or is it just like a preset?
It's just to bring in a high quality image when you first go in to embed an image.
Okay.
If you embed an image, it's going to force a smart object on, but you can try for yourself. If you pull in an image directly from a folder or from the desktop, a lot of times it'll be smaller, and then you have to scale it up to be the same size as the one that you placed as a smart object. So if you have to scale it up, you're losing image data, and that can create like fuzzy edges or a pixelated look to your image. So if you're looking for the highest possible quality image, you want to place it, and Place automatically will place it as a smart object. So when you scale it, Photoshop will configure it to look as good as possible. And it also is already the largest possible size that it can pull from the file that you've saved. So that's why you would use it. So it's worth it, especially for small images that you've pulled from the internet and can't find a larger, better quality version. But you always have to remember to go in and do that whenever you place something, that smart object thing, and take that off of there after you've scaled your image.
Just one more thing.
Sure, Kayla.
Sorry.
No, it's good.
I know on my first collage, the black and white one, I figured out like how to like use the depixelize tool, but I forgot how to do it. It was somewhere on layers. Can you just go over that quickly?
Yeah, I'm not sure which one. What is it? Is it a command, depixelize, pixelate? Or
it was under layers, but basically all it did was just like make it look less, whatever picture you put in, look a little bit less like pixely if it's a smaller image. So it kind of just smooths it.
Okay, it might have been, if it's under layers, in the layers submenu.
Yeah, I think so. I did it by accident, so.
Yeah, it's probably a mode change because we looked at those. Let me go back to, whoops, share screen would help. Okay. Back to the house. Yeah, let's see, for instance, if dissolve is selected, you'll see a lot of pixels for an effect. So that's probably the look that you want to get rid of though. Sometimes you'll be selected in dissolve and not realize it as you're going through these. So make sure that's one thing that can make it look pixely. The other thing would be just to be blending it with a different mode. Sometimes that will fix edges of things. If you have like, if I have light sort of crusty looking highlights, I did on this bird actually and took them off already, but and you don't want to go in by hand and fix all those up. If you choose darken or multiply, it's dropping out lights, and that could make something look less pixelated. So it could have been that, and some of these other blend modes will do that too. Another thing might just be to change the opacity, because, whoops, let me put this back in normal. Sometimes just blending an image slightly with the background will make the bitmap more complex color-wise, and it just looks cleaner. So that could be it, but I don't know if there's a command in layers, specifically in the layers menu to.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it was like something, if you look at the actual like layer, like let's say you're on the house layer, in the bottom right corner, there was like a square. I think I did something in there. I don't know.
Yeah, if you click twice, you've got layer style blending options. That could be it. I hardly ever use
that's
these,
probably what I
just go up
did.
to layers and get the layer styles there, but I bet that's it. Yeah, because if you click twice on the layer where the name isn't, this is the menu that pops up. And so that could
Mhm.
definitely do it. Maybe with the blending, or, you know, if you clicked on one of these other ones, some of those have a filter in it. Even if you didn't, you know, mean to click on them, they could cause that. So that's a possibility too. The
Okay.
layers themselves aren't really geared to do filters, but we're going to look at that today where you can do that. You can take noise out or you can add noise to it. So that's something new we were going to look at in Photoshop. So that might be helpful too. And it could have been just a keystroke in one of those for that matter. So any of the above could cause that. And that's always the way it is with Photoshop. There's multiple ways to do things and there's multiple ways things can go wrong. So it makes it interesting, but it's also makes it frustrating. So the best thing is just to keep practicing with an image that you're really motivated to work on, because the more motivated you are to finish an image, the more you'll learn the program. I mean, I find like going through manuals can be really helpful while you're working on an image. But if you're kind of just going through the manual with their images and sort of rote learning, I think it's really hard to learn Photoshop. So have something that, you know, gives you challenges as you're building it. You want it to look a certain way and you have to figure it out. And that's a much more fun and interesting and better way of learning, more effective way of learning Photoshop. Okay, any other questions or frustrations with Photoshop? Wendy, did you find you can share screen yet? I don't know. Yeah, it's hard with the PC too. I mean, if it's not got as much memory, so we'll see. Anthony, did everything go okay with you? Oh, great. Okay, good.
Oh, oh,
Yay. Okay. So let's see, can you bring your layers over? Yeah, just click on the word layers there and that should open up the menu for you. I'm so unfamiliar with a PC screen, it's bad. I should get one I really need to do that. Okay, so go to the Windows menu and drag down to where it says layers, up right in the middle. Like, yeah, right there. I keep wanting to point. Okay, so there you go. Okay, so now we can see, okay, good. So you've got your, okay, there's the parakeet, parrot. So what did you want to do? Oops, back to layers. And I don't see that your parakeet is a smart object. So you should be able to erase around if you want to get that background gone. Yes, good. And then click in there, yeah. And that's a good one. I mean, that was an image that had a lot of dark surrounding it, very contrasty. So it's easy to go in there with either the magic wand tool or the object selection tool and just click on the areas you want and it'll put a bounding box around any contrasting colors. So that cleaned up well. So did you want to change the size of it? Okay, go to scale. Whoops, drag down to transform again. And then drag over to the right and then hit scale, good. Okay, so now those little, yeah, if you want to change the proportions of it, so maybe it's a fatter parakeet, you can hit the shift key at the same time that you're scaling it and it will allow you to break the proportions that the original image was set in. That looks great. Okay, and so when you get it where you want it to be, at least temporarily, you can hit your return key to place it permanently, or, you know, make it workable in the layer to place it down. You don't want to go on until you do that.
The beak, like, I can't see the part of the beak too. Can you see that? The beak
Yeah,
and
I
parrot?
think it's just because it's on the black, or it may have cut that out when you were selecting. Can you see
Okay.
it now that it's off the black?
No. I could just put it as the black right here. So it shows.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times when you clean something up with the automated selection and then delete tools, you'll lose a part of your image. It's just the way it is with Photoshop. You try to be as
Okay.
exact as possible. And then you just have to go in with your paintbrush and redraw that area. Or
Okay.
you could use the smudge tool and smudge another part of that thing in. That's just like a common cleanup thing you have to do with Photoshop. So actually that came out really good. That was a good choice of image because it had the contrasty background. It's easier to drop it out. So that looks really good. And then, yeah, strategically placing it like that can sometimes bring the detail that you lost back in. So the
Okay.
main things are to, you know, be on the layer, make sure that's the one you want, you know, click on the one that you want selected. Make sure nothing else is selected by hitting Command D or deselect in the menu. And then also making sure that the smart object is no longer on that particular layer content. And then be sure when you've got it placed where you want, you can always move it again because it's on a separate layer. But hit return to confirm it.
I think that's all right because, like, even though the part I lost, I mean, like, it actually looks like he still has his beak.
Yeah, I think it looks great. Yeah, before it looked like the bird. And that's one of those things we talked about last class with composition. When it was just touching the edge of the tree, it looked like the bird was kind of entering the tree. It looks like it's on the same depth plane. It got illusion. But as soon as you pulled the head over the tree, it makes the bird look like it's popping forward because there's contrast there. So it looks much better when you did that. And then you've got your detail back. So that worked out really well.
Thank you very much.
I like your background too. I mean, that was a good find. Is that a photo?
Yeah, that's a photo no, that's not a photo. I found it, like technically I don't have a camera that's has that much quality. So, like, I had to take that from an image.
No, that's fine. Yeah, it's interesting. I like that. You're going to add anything else to it?
Yeah, I'm gonna put, like, more animals and, like, put all different kind of animals because I really love nature. So
yeah, same here. I like that a lot. I mean, already those strange shadows, they're already looking a little surreal. They're almost too perfect, which is really nice. So it looks like somebody did something with it. That's why I asked if it was a photo or a painting, but it looks great. So that really already lends a mood to it and an atmosphere. So I think when you start adding other pieces to it, that'll help hold the composition together too, those nice diagonal stripes. So that's a good foundation image. That's great.
thank you.
Great job. Okay, so let's go look over at Kaylee's, and I'm just gonna go back to the regular screen if you can, and share screen. That would be good.
I was gonna say, do you want me to share my screen? Because I think
Yeah, that would be good. Okay, yeah, so while Wendy's unsharing, you can share.
How do you unshare again?
You know what? That's a good question. I do not know. Let me see view options. No. Stop participant sharing. Okay, there we go.
Okay.
Yay. Okay, so you can go ahead, Kaylee.
Okay, 1 second. I just want to make sure I had it pulled out. So I don't have a lot going on in it yet, but I've started it.
The allergies today. Oh, wow. Okay, so you want to talk us through how you built it? Or do you have yours you can show?
Yeah, so far it's not like a ton of stuff yet. I just have the background layer, which I grabbed off of, I think, the Pixels website. My first one I just grabbed off of Google, and I really don't want to do that because I can't tell where everything's from. And a lot of those, like, Shutterstock sites, if you try to grab an image, it's annoying. But yeah, the kids are a separate image. I just kind of erased around that because I wanted to give them, like, plants for heads. Because these are, like, This is actually based off of like 2 dreams that I've had when I was little. So one of them, I was like falling through my grandmother's bay window into the ocean, and there was like umbrellas everywhere. So I wanted to put like different kinds of umbrellas in here and like have different textures. And then I had a dream also with like a bunch of kids that had like trees for heads. And whenever I would talk, the trees would start to grow. So I don't know. I like the idea of like having those like childhood dreams put together into one like image.
So what kind of feeling are you trying to get across to the viewer with the way, you know, the colors you picked and the way you place the objects and the different objects that you have intersecting? Is a surrealist image?
Yeah, I wanted to have like a theme of like transitioning, like life transition. So like using like kids and then having the sunset in the background, like between night and day. So using those sort of themes and using like a simple color palette.
Okay, I like your limited color palette a lot. I mean, just the purple and the yellow, it's like one of my favorite color palettes, but
Yeah.
it does give you a certain, yeah, what, like, how do you think that's different than a different, you know, a brighter color palette or blues, you know, for the feeling that you want to get across?
I don't know. Like I like the background image I grabbed a lot. That was like purely luck. I like that it's a little bit more like moody towards the bottom. And I like that I have that really light, pale sort of yellow up here. So I want to like cut into it with these like darker like colors too. I think that could be interesting.
Yeah, I love that umbrella as a silhouette. And that's kind of how it would look, sort of, but it's like a little off enough that, you know, it makes it feel surreal, but it's really clean. It looks like it belongs there. So it's very interesting the way that that worked out. Yeah, I
Yeah.
think somebody might want to mute if you've got something else going on behind you, because I can hear like another. Okay, thank you. Also, I do like that background that those 2 spheres that are just right under the handle of the.
Yeah.
Yeah, that makes.
This was purely just me throwing it onto onto the Photoshop so I could just start working with it, but I kind of like it there. I think that creates like an interesting line. And I
Yeah,
like the idea of working with the what's it called, with the 4-point perspective. So
right.
maybe I could play into that.
I mean, it does kind of. I mean, also having that odd number of objects, I mean, those 2 round objects, if there's 2 and then 2 of the people, it can be too symmetrical almost. Having that asymmetry of the odd number helps, I think, the composition a lot. And you'll see a lot, I mean, in like the Japanese design, who a lot of Americans followed Japanese design standards in the 18th century and wrote most of the design books we have today off of that. But that, you know, they really emphasized having an odd number of objects within any composition. So I think that's definitely working for you here, having 5 main objects, the 2 people and the 2 suns and then the umbrella, instead of 2 and 2. It makes it so much
Is
more
there
interesting.
like something that I could like add to it, do you think? Like I feel like it's really simple right now, but I'm not sure.
So any suggestions from the class about what she could add to this or anything that she could
Yeah.
do to make it feel less
A
simple?
little bit stock.
So what do you guys think? Liliana, what do you think? I was testing. Anthony, any suggestions?
Honestly, I don't know, because do you feel like you want to add more to it? Is that what it is?
I just don't know if it looks unfinished as is right now. Like obviously I need to clean this up a bit, the umbrella, but other than that, like, and this too, I want to tilt this, like I said earlier. I didn't really know how to do that once I already embedded it, so.
Maybe add something way off in the distance.
Yeah, I want to play with like the depth of field more too, because I feel like I really like the idea of these 2 kids sitting on the crest. So maybe having something back here or up here, because this umbrella is kind of like vague, but I kind of like that it's vague too. I don't know.
Did you say you were going to add more umbrellas in the background for a pattern?
Probably.
Or? Okay, yeah, I think that background is a little
Plain.
Plain, yeah, I mean, that might help. It doesn't have to be as dominant as the other umbrella because then that pattern would just be the image. It would dominate everything. But,
Mhm.
you know, if you use the modes to blend them in or, you know, lighten the color a little bit so it blends more with the background and let that black
Play with the
one come
opacity
through.
too.
Yeah.
Okay.
And also, I think, you know, the demonstration I was going to do today, you've got like kind of light edges around the people. So
Mhm.
that might actually work with the image that you're putting together because the sun is coming from behind them. But that kind of lends, you know, a little bit of a stock photo look to it. You might want to tone them down a little just because in stock photos, a lot of times they'll just place people on a white cloth or a fabric background and then light them from the two sides. So you get this distinct, yeah, that outline. So
So how can I
immediately
kind of?
you could try using the burn tool to just, you know, burn the highlights down, and the options when you choose burn tool, switch to
Okay.
highlights, and then it will only deal with those lightest lights. Sometimes that gives you kind of too much of a grayed out looking, um, you know, shadow, but then you can add color back into it. It's under the same menu as the smear tool or the smudge tool. There's a sponge tool. No, actually that's in the same menu as the dodge and burn tool, but you can add some color back into the highlights with that. So you could do that maybe just on one side and it would make them look like they're curving towards the background more rather than maybe there's light coming directly from behind them. But when we go back to the deer, we're going to look at lighting filters, effects
Okay.
filters, and that might help do something automated with that so you don't have to go back in and spend so much time touching up the highlights. But that's one thing. I mean, also you might want to add a drop shadow underneath them. So even though they're on water, they'd still cast a shadow.
Yeah.
And that might help and make them look like they belong more in that image. And then just
Okay.
maybe even enlarging them a little bit in proportion to the wave, or, you know, pulling the wave down so there's less of it, even though I do really like the way it looks in the front abstractly. But you could play around with sizing and, you know, you don't have to commit to anything as long as it's in separate layers or save a few versions of it. And if you have a printer, sometimes it helps to print them out and lay them next to one another and then
Okay.
make a final judgment that way, because it gives you more information about the composition. I think it, you know, is a way to contrast and compare the different versions. But so far, I think it's really interesting and it's looking good. I love the idea of the umbrella and the people with plant heads. And without their heads, it just looks like she's lifting. I don't know. It's just so strange right now. It's definitely surrealistic and feels like a dream. And it has those dream archetypes of waves and umbrellas. I mean, I really, yeah, very nice
Thank
start.
you.
So is there another one you want to share or any other comments?
Not really. I mean, I have an earlier version on the discussion board if you want to look at it, but it's pretty unfinished and I didn't really like that design anyway. So, I mean, it might be worth looking at if you want to.
Okay, well, you can show it and then you could just talk about what you didn't like about it. Sometimes that's helpful to people to see that editing process and why you decided to change it. So yeah, if you have it, that would be good. Do you want me to share it? Would that be easier?
Oh, hold on. Where am I? Yeah, if you want.
Okay.
No, actually, never mind. I got it. Sorry.
No,
That's all it is. I just started, like, this was my, like, closer to my original dream, and these are just Google images, so I didn't want to, you know, use them. But I do like the idea of, like, playing with the different textures and, like, having something silly like the cocktail umbrella. I might still use that. I'm not sure.
okay, I mean, that image, I mean, already has such a different feeling than the other one.
Yeah.
So, yeah, the mood is entirely different. And it looks very whimsical, especially with the cocktail umbrella, and the color palette with the blue is always, you know, more upbeat sometimes than whimsical feeling.
Yeah.
That was a figure, so yeah. So if you weren't going for that, I can see why you would change it. I do like the images you chose, though. I mean, that could be something entirely different, just another take on the concept. So
Mm-hmm.
you may want to work on it in the future if you keep hold of it.
Yeah, I might play with it again, but for now, I think I'm going to work on the second one. I think I've got like a better grasp on that one.
Okay.
But yeah, that's all.
All right, thanks for showing it though. That's great to be able to show your work in progress and then just discuss about, why you didn't like things or, how it was not meeting your intended goal for the picture. Does anybody else want to share their screen or share their work? Okay, so if not, I'm just going to go in and demonstrate the lighting effects and some of the filters, and that may help you, with those issues that we were just talking about with Kaylee, where she has the two figures. They look great. She's cleaned them up really nicely. They're sitting on the waves, and those look awesome. But she just wants it to look more merged with the rest of the background, or to feel like it's not a stock photo. So there's a few things you can do. And let me hit your chat so I can see what's going on there before we go into the screen share. Oh, okay, Liliana, I'm sorry to hear about your computer. Thanks for putting that in chat and letting us know. If you continue to have problems with that, if you go to school, you can bring it in to the Moakley building to Eric on the second floor. And that's where, our tech is, and he can help you with that if you can't get that straightened out. I'm not sure, what that could be. Yeah, IT is great at Bridgewater. I mean, I've taught at a lot of different schools. Bridgewater has the best IT department I've ever met, and they never get frustrated. They're always patient with you. They'll help you fix it. So don't feel shy about going over there, or you can email him. It's Eric LePage, and it's just LEPAGE at Bridgewater EDU, eLePage, and he will help you. And if you can't get him that way, you can just go to the IT department and the website, and his email link is there. But that's very frustrating. And, we all are having computer issues about this and that. We just have to keep working through them. But thanks for letting me know. Okay, good. All right, so I'm going to go to share screen, and we'll look at those things with the deer image that we just talked about with the wave image, because that's my problem with that work too right now. That it doesn't look like things really belong together. And because it's a surrealist image, I don't really want it to look perfectly together, but I want it to look like it's a believable world. And right now, especially the deer, doesn't look like it fits in there because the light, he's floating for one thing. And also the bird has an entirely different lighting situation than the deer. The deer is very sort of straight on, evenly lit, and the bird has a very dramatic shadow underneath. So I want to get some of that drama into the deer lighting. So I could use, like we just mentioned, I want to make sure that my deer is selected first. Right now my house layer is selected. So I'm clicking on the name for the deer layer. So that's selected now. It's got a lighter gray surrounding it. And then I'm going to choose the Dodge and Burn tool. Set is right in the middle of your toolbar. One looks like a lollipop. The other one looks like pinched fingers. And those are just old darkroom symbols from a chemical darkroom where you're either blocking or burning the image a little bit more under the enlarger. That's why it's called that. It does the same thing. So if I go to Burn tool, which is the pinched fingers, I can paint over the image of the deer in certain areas to try to create the illusion of there being a shadow there. So I'm going to go up to the options menu for the Burn tool. And I don't really want to change the highlights. That would be the brightest brights, and that's the spots on the deer. I kind of want to change the midtones into a darker tone. So I'm going to choose midtones in range. For the image with the people sitting on the wave, you would want to choose highlights here because those are the brightest brights that Kaylee had in her people. So she wants to tone those down rather than the midtones. So this allows you to select what parts you're going to manipulate of the grayscale in your image. or the value scale, I should say. And then the exposure is the same as opacity when you're working with color or the paintbrush. It's just showing you how dense or how intense the effect is going to be. So instead of turning this up to 100, which is going to give me a really dramatic shadow right away, I'll leave this on 50. And sometimes with this tool, you have to turn it way down to even 10 or so because it just has a lot of impact right away. So I'm going to make a larger soft-edged brush, round brush. And now just come back over some of the parts that would coordinate with the direction that I want the light to look like it's coming from. So I like the way the bird looks. It looks like the light's coming from above, upper right. So I want to keep that in mind while I'm burning the deer. So I'm just going over and over it again with the 50% intensity of that particular brush, just on the side that wouldn't be hit by light. If the light was coming from the upper right. And sometimes it's hard to figure that out. You can almost use a model or something, but okay, even that little bit, it sort of looks a little bit better. I want to get rid of some of the brightness on this foot because the body would probably be blocking it, but it's not going to let me do that until I change the grayscale that I want it to impact. So even the back of him, because, or her, is lit so evenly, it made it look flatter. This kind of gives it more dimension. Okay, I'm going to go up and change this to highlights now because I want to tone down this white here on the foot so it blends more with the grass and looks like the body is blocking some of the light. And this is also going to get rid of those little glowy edges that were also, you know, on the people that were sitting on the wave. So that is one way to get rid of those. And there's some glowy edges under here. I can just darken these up a little bit. And these are all going to overlap into other parts of the grayscale. So you're just picking your mode up here in the range for the part of the grayscale that you want to impact the most. Okay, so I don't want it to go too dark so it doesn't separate from the background at all. And I'll probably add a drop shadow later. But I'm going to go back in now and choose the opposite tool in this tool set, which is the dodge tool. And that will lighten those three parts of the grayscale. So right now, I want to change this back to mid-tones. And this bird's really bright on the part where the sun is hitting it. So I'm going to add some more highlights back into the head area and where the sun would be hitting it this time, where it wouldn't be in shadow. So maybe just a little bit more on the back. So this tool, if you use it a lot, will brighten up and make the grayscale look more saturated. And that just means purer color that doesn't have any gray in it. So that can work well, or it can start to become too incongruent with the rest of the image and really annoying. So if you find that happening, you make more drama lighting on the legs a little bit. Okay, that looks better. It makes it look like it's more rounded. Okay, so if that bright color gets to be too much in the composition, the other tool in the tool set is the sponge tool that we were talking about in terms of Kaylee's illustration. And this can take away saturation if this is set on desaturate. And in this case, the flow is like the opacity, that's the intensity of the object. But I can go over the midtones now and that will suck out some of the saturation. And really what it's doing is just adding gray value back in. So it's more compatible with the background. And if I change this to the opposite, to saturate, it's gonna add more pure color, more hue back in. So you can go back and forth with saturate and desaturate, just like you can with the burn and the dodge till you get it just the way that you want it. And I'm putting more color back in because usually where the light's hitting it, you're getting more intense saturated color. And that brings the image forward in the picture plane. So now the bird's kind of at the same level. It's still really contrasty, so it's pulling forward. And I might sort of go and blend the bird. But that's how I like that amount of shadow and highlight now. So the other thing that happened when I brought in this image was that it was from a stock photo company, which is usually the case, and they always put their copyright things in. If you're not on Pexels or Pixabay with the free images that are good quality, this one happened to have a split in the middle of the legs where they had their logo. And you can see kind of lines from that throughout. I could go and spend a lot of time and get rid of those, but because I just want to paint from this, I'm not going to. But this bothers me here, the split between the legs and this little drop out of highlight when I hit the select tool and dropped out the background. That always happens when you're cleaning up your images in Photoshop. So you can easily fix those places up with the smudge tool or just paint in a color that's close. But I'm just going to smudge this together for now. That's kind of the quickest thing. And if that doesn't work, because I keep pushing the transparency around, there's another tool. And before we go on to the lighting effects, I wanted to show that. And it can be, you know, it takes some practice. You might want to get a sample image to work with before you use it. But in this case, I would go and smudge as much as I could together to get rid of that kind of chopped look and fill in that hole as best I could. But now there's still some hole left and I can only go so far with smudge. So I'm going up to the clone tool, and that's up a couple more steps from the smudge tool. And what the clone tool, it has a couple steps involved that you have to get used to working with, but it just allows you to pick up an area of color that's in an object and then place it somewhere else. So in this case, I have to hold Option down on my keyboard, or probably Alt on your PC, and then click once. I don't have a mouse, but I'm just clicking on my trackpad to set that spot. And now when I go to paint in the area that has the hole, it's bringing down that whole color set from up above. So I chose a color area that's very close to what I want to fill in. And the trick to making this look good is to keep changing your set point as much as possible so you're not painting in things that you don't want in there. And that's what takes practice. But it's a series of keystrokes. And again, I'll put this video on Blackboard so you can review it. It's just Option, hold till you get that kind of crosshair looking icon, and then click your mouse or your trackpad or your pen, and then paint from, you'll get this little plus sign trailing along your paintbrush, and that's pulling in that complex color from the other area. And this tool works great for touching up. A lot of retouchers that doctor up portraits use this. I mean, this is the way most of the illusion of perfection is created in Photoshop for magazines. It allows you to just transfer a whole color set. If you tried to paint this in with a color that you picked from the color palette, an individual color, you would not see, it would look blocky and chunky and noticeable. But this gives you a nice smooth transition because it's picking up that whole set of light colors. So Option, click to set it, and then lift up on the Option key and your trackpad or your mouse at the same time. Then click and hold just the mouse and then paint, and you'll get that trailing cursor that shows you what it's painting from to put into the new object. So this would work throughout this image with all these lines that came in from the copyright. It's time consuming, but it's a lot easier than using a brush, which would be impossible to get the same effect. So Option, click here, let up on both, and then paint. So practice with that because it's a powerful tool, and we'll review it over and over again because that's something that is very useful in Photoshop. And now as I zoom in, I've got a lot of these little edges here. I could use the eraser to get rid of those. I'm not going to go through all of that, but just as a reminder, because we've already done that, here's your erase tool. And I could pick a very small, while I'm zoomed in, brush with a soft edge, and then just go back over those. I could also try shifting some of the modes because that's time consuming too. In this case, I would just get rid of the most aggravating ones that are showing up as a choppy line. You could try using some of the modes in your layer stack to see if that wouldn't help blend it in. But I'm gonna zoom out. And when I'm zoomed out, it really doesn't look too bad. There's some sharp, bright lines up here. So that's another case, just like with the people on the water, where you could go get your burn tool and a really tiny brush, and then just set the options to highlights. And then I could go back in over those brightest lights on the deer to just tone them down, because there would be some backlighting if the light's coming from above, but not that much. So you don't want that kind of chopped look. So that's one way to kind of get rid of that, along with the eraser tool where you need it. Okay, so I would spend a lot more time on it if I was like, yeah, trying to get this perfect for a digital presentation, but for now it looks okay. So there's some other tools, actually besides this little logo that's still left there, yeah, that we'll look at to do that in a more automated way. Whoops. Okay. So, first, this deer still feels like it's floating on the grass. So I want to add a shadow to the grass, and I could paint that in with the paintbrush or burn it into the grass, but I'm just going to do that as a drop shadow so we can look at the layer styles again to review that from last week. So I'm going up to layer pull down menu, and then going to the layer styles menu. And this is a menu set over to the right that you could spend a lot of time with and, you know, experiment with these, and we'll look at some more of them during the semester. But the ones that get used the most are outer glow, that sort of adds an aura around something and helps it blend in with a lighter background, your object, or a drop shadow, which will put a shadow underneath or wherever you want a shadow to be. And I could also add a shadow with outer glow, so I'll go through that. But first, drop shadow. One thing about it, when I first put this on, you can see all the places where I have like little bits that I didn't clean up, that I didn't notice about, that I didn't notice. It's putting a shadow around all of those. So it's telling me where I need to clean up the image. So I would, if I was working on this as a finished image, cancel this and go out and erase those parts of the object that are still there floating around in the sky, causing it to pick up my drop shadow. But for now, I'm just going to turn the spread back. Oops, and I made a line on him too, oh well. To 0, because that takes away that very dramatic looking drop shadow that looks like a border around it. There's cases where you may want that, but in this case I really don't. So I'm putting that to 0 in the menu for the layer styles. And then I'm going to choose the angle that the light in this little circle is coming from, which is the upper left at an angle. So that will conform my drop shadow to that angle. And it's going to do that if you have successive layers where you use a layer effect with a light source. It's always going to shift all the other ones to that same angle to make a consistent lighting source. Photoshop figures, painters want that, or designers want that, so they force you to do that. The only way that you can do that is to just apply the effects, which we'll look at, and then go back and redo it again if you want different lighting sources. So in a way it's helpful, but it's also one of those things that can be annoying. So this distance here will show where my drop shadow is casting the shadow, how far away from the object. The further away, the more it's going to look like the object is floating on the background. So I don't want it to go too far, but I do want some shadow to define the edges, kind of block out some of the house and look like there's, the deer isn't so much floating on the grass. But because this is an automated effect, you're not getting quite the personal definition that you want. So it may work entirely for you, or you may need to go back in and repair some of it. So I'm going to say okay here because I like what it did, but it still didn't help with the feet much, and it doesn't look like the body's casting a shadow on the grass. So now I'm going to go back to the background layer, which is the grass and the sky layer. And again, go pick up the burn tool. Pick up a larger brush and choose midtones, or maybe even shadows this time, to just add a little bit more shadow under where the deer is standing. So it looks like there's some cast shadows maybe coming out from the feet. So that helps a little bit. And then I'm going to go up to shadows too. Okay. Yeah, it looks better, but it still looks like it's floating. So the last thing would be to go to, or for now anyway, the deer again. And this time I'm just going to erase out the feet with a small brush. So I'm going back to the erase tool and make a really small brush so it kind of looks like the grass, smaller. And then just erase. This is on opacity 100. I'm going to put this on 50 so it's not such a dramatic effect. And then just erase the feet into the background so some of the grass is showing through the feet. So it looks like, you know, if the deer was really standing in this situation, it would be covering up the hooves pretty much. I'll leave a little bit there. And then after, I might go back in and add even more shadow in the grass, but that sort of, that roots it. It makes it look like it's less floating. It sort of merges it with the composition and creates the illusion that these things belong together. And this can be very time consuming, kind of if you want a really nice image for reproduction photographically, but it's worth it because that's how you get those really dramatic surrealist effects. That makes it look like that could be someplace you could crawl into and everything belongs together, even though it's incongruous in source. Back with this one a little bit more here. Okay. So there is an automated lighting tool that you can use for this. And it may have as dramatic an effect on the deer. So I'm going to bring the deer up again. I'm going to just save this one. Probably not as custom because the dodge and burn tool is always the best tool if you really want it to get a sort of customized look to it. Whoops, I'm going to go back up to place embedded. But it's very time, it can save a lot of time doing this another way. So I'm going to place a new deer, enlarge it. And I'm going to leave the white background on it so you can see that better. Or actually, no, I think I will get rid of it. Sorry. And just turn off the deer below it. Yeah, that's better. So now I'm going to object select and just drawing a box around the deer and up. Sorry. I mean, drawing a lasso. I took that off of the box. All right. And then I have to go to select inverse and delete. And this is still a smart object, so I do that all the time when I place something. I have to go into layer, rasterize, smart object to be able to delete that background. Okay, so there's the deer again. And deselect, Command D. And the floating deer is back. Okay, and I think somebody mentioned, maybe Kaylee mentioned that you wanted to know how to use the transform tools other than scale to rotate something So we'll do that first before I use the lighting effects. So I want to make sure that this deer is chosen. I want it to face the other way so it's not looking out of the composition like the bird is, because the two of them looking out is kind of making it, my eye just go right out the upper left-hand side of the composition. And I want them to counter each other so the eye stays in the middle. So I'm going up to Edit, Transform, and this time I'm going to go past Scale and come down to the bottom where it says Flip Horizontal. And then just click that. And that will flip the deer to the opposite direction. I still have some of that image that was on the background that was just off the screen, I mean off the workspace that I didn't see. So I want to get rid of that with the square rectangular selection tool and just put a box around it and hit delete first. Command D to deselect that area, and then go to the move tool, which is the top one in your toolbar because you use it the most, and click and drag on the deer to bring it back in to the left-hand corner where the shadow is again that I did on the grass. Okay, so now without all that shading with the burn tool, the deer doesn't look united or as dramatic as the rest of the photo again with the bird. So this time I'm going to try to use an automated tool to change that. So underneath your filters, and this is another menu we'll be exploring a lot because there's so much in just this one menu. But I'm going to drag down to a filter called Render. And that actually adds new information to an image. So I'm going to Render. And it's fun to practice with these clouds. It'll build clouds for you between two different selected colors that you have. But right now we're going to lighting effects. And you have 3 different types of lighting effects you can use. Sort of directional light, ambient light, room light. This one is my favorite one, the one it defaults to. It's just a spotlight. So in this kind of situation, and this is much more delicate looking than the dodge and burn tool that I used. This is just giving me a directional circle that will allow me to scale it in terms of length with the light coming from the right. And then if you just let your cursor hover over the dots that come around this tool, it can kind of be tricky to use, but you can rotate the lighting direction. So if I wanted the shadows from the upper right, for instance, I could rotate the light so it's coming up from the bottom left and look like something's casting a shadow on this creature. So that might work with the 2 people in the waves, this tool, because you can tell it which direction you want it to be. And the light in yours is kind of coming from the upper right-hand side. So you could just rotate this around till you have the light coming from that direction where the sun would be naturally casting on those 2 figures. And it's kind of tricky to go back and forth between scale and rotate. You kind of just have to let the, and then you can also move this. You have to wait till let your cursor hover over the little dots until it changes the text designation. So I'm going back to rotate this around. I'm gonna come down to this one. Nope. Come on. Whoops. Yeah, and I had this happen earlier in the day. I don't know why it does it. This is my computer. You can just ignore that. I'm gonna undo it. Whoops, it's not gonna even let me do that. This is the computer that had the spill. So it does some funky things with the trackpad still, and this is one of them. So I'm gonna get rid of that guy. Well, actually, no. Let's see. Yeah, I think I will replace it. I'll just place it embedded again so you can see, or maybe pick up a different deer. Yeah, this guy's cute. He doesn't have so much text behind him. Okay, so as soon as I did that, that one went away. Good. So All right, and I don't know what that is. I'll figure it out. But anyway, so here's another situation with the white. This one has much less text. It's just down here. So I'm just going back up to, in this case, because it's so white without any, just a little bit of text on the bottom, I'm going to Magic Wand tool, and I'm clicking on the white area because that is selecting by color and value. And I think maybe that will work better. It's kind of giving me a little bit of an edge here. So I'm going to deselect and then go back up to Object Selection tool, see if that might not work a little bit better. And then I can also skip around this name here. Yeah, that looks pretty good. And then go back up to select inverse with the object selection tool, because I don't want to cut out the object. I want to cut out the background when I hit delete. And yeah, smart object. Okay. So now it looks like the bird's going right into this poor deer's eye, so, which could be interesting, but I'm going to move it over. And then this time I'm going to go up to edit, transform, and I want to rotate the deer a little bit so it doesn't look like it's leaning so much to the left. So I'm going to rotate instead of scale. And then you get this little, just like with the lighting tool that we'll try again, you get this little arrow that looks like a double arrow with a bend in it. When you put that on any of the squares, it will allow you to click and hold your mouse, your cursor, and then pull the image around or back and forth so you can get it balanced the way that you want. So that's another nice feature of that transform menu. And again, just like with scale, you have to hit return to set it. So I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to try, if that happens again, I'm going to reload my Photoshop because that's so weird. That's the second time it's happened today. I'm going to go up to filter and render because I just love, and yeah, it's not giving me the lighting effects. It's got to be my computer again without restarting again. But those are, yeah, I'm debating whether to close this image and try to reopen it. Maybe I'll do that. So I'll do that, and while that is going, we'll see. I'm going to call it something different too. When I have a problem like this where it's just repeating the same thing again and again, sometimes it helps just to rename the image. So just adding like a 5 ahead of this or something will change the name enough so it may sort of not relate this image to that accident anymore or that glitch. So now I'm going to close Photoshop, so stop share for a second. So any questions while I'm rebooting this thing? Okay, great. All right, so back to Photoshop, and I'm going to go up to new window to find it. Okay. Whoops. And I'm going to go back to share screen again. Okay, so I'm going to go right to the deer this time. I don't know if it's a memory issue, but anyway, let's try one more time. Yay, lighting effects. Okay. So I want to move this above a little bit, and then try to get this to rotate around it. I'm not going to manipulate it too much because this is extremely memory intensive and not every computer will do this. Most of them will now, but if you have an older Mac or Chromebook, it may not perform this. So the best way is just to do the changes with the dodge and burn tool by hand. So I'm just trying to stretch this to get enough light so it's not such a spotlight. And then place it where it would naturally be sitting on this object if the light was intense and coming from the upper right. So that looks good, although wherever I'm outside of the spotlight, it's too dark. And this is the most accurate of all these tools. The one that it defaults to is spotlight. So for this one, it may not work for me. This one's not too bad. It kind of looks like a cast shadow coming from the bird on top of the animal, but the feet are really dark. So it works in some situations. You might try that with the people sitting on the wave, because that way you wouldn't have to retouch up all those highlights on one of the sides. It would turn those into shadows and it might work better in that situation. I mean, I really do like what it's looking like up here, but I kind of like what I did better by hand. I do kind of like the feet being just shadows like this, though. It's kind of spooky, so I like this version. So I'm going to save this and just save this. It's a separate file anyway. So I'm going to click OK here. This is just a preview, and preview is checked up here in options. So if you don't like what you did with this, you can just cancel it and it would take it off. And I have a hover thing set here, so that's what it's doing there. Let me see if I can go back and then just save it. And back to lighting effects. And enlarge. Okay, there we are. So if I like it, I'm just going to click OK. And I don't know why it stretches my screen like that for a second either. But anyway, it applied the effect as soon as I hit OK. So now that's part of the layer. I could go back to undo and undo lighting effects if I decide I really don't like it. But I like it, so I'm going to leave it there. It also saves me having to clean up this white space from the background that was in the object. So that can be a really nice tool. And at this point, because this is acting a little funky, and this is something you should do anyway, I'm just going to go save to save that whole file. Okay, and we'll just look at a couple more filters. And then I won't load on too much more in the demonstration. I'm going to get a layer visible that would look kind of be impacted most by filters right now. But actually first in the deer, I was going to use one filter that you may find useful. A lot of photographers use it before I go do the other ones. And that is under your filters, under render menu. If you go to sharpen, there's all these sharpening tools that make the edges between contrasting colors and values look sharper. So this is something that has fur in it, and I want to see more detail in the fur to paint from. So sharpening this will probably help. And also, I think Kaylee was asking about blur. This is a way to do the opposite, and then we'll look at how to blur something. So if I want to see more detail and more crispiness kind of in the fur of this deer, I'm going to sharpen, unsharp, mask. And all these will work. They all have different features: sharpen edges, sharpen more, sharpen, smart sharpen. But my favorite here is unsharp mask, because that gives you the most control over the sharpening routine. And we'll look at all the others, but this one is nice because it has a sub menu with it. And you can change the amount of sharpening. As I move that up, you can kind of see more texture, because it's actually simplifying the grayscale, which if you put it up too much, you're going to lose a lot of grayscale and it starts to look very grainy. And I can see it up here. I don't know if you can on your screen, but you can start seeing the pixels showing as chunks almost. So for a realistic sharpening, if that's not the effect you want, usually around 100 and 120 for the amount. And then the radius is talking about the amount of pixels that it's including in its sharpening. So it's going to look at each pixel and include another 4 and bundle them together and giving you the sharpening of the contrasting pixels that are sitting next to one another. So the radius is even more dramatic than the amount. If you want a very graphic looking image by simplifying the grayscale deliberately, this can do that. And sometimes if certain images, it really works. In this case, I just want to be able to see the fur a little clearer. So I'm just going to leave this up, and that's a lot, like 18, 16%. With a photo that you want to look natural, you would leave that around between 1 and 2 pixels and not go further than that. So I'll leave that around 5. Threshold just tells the computer how much of the grayscale you want to include in the sharpening routine. And this can be nice if you want to bring up highlights in something. The more I pull this over to the right, the less of the dark. There's 255 levels of gray to white. I mean, black to white in your Photoshop program. All the color is applied to those to get your millions of different colors with value and hue. So if this is on 0, it's including all those 255 levels in the grayscale in the sharpening routine, and that's the most natural look. The more I move this threshold over to the right, the less of the dark, the fewer dark levels are being included. So when it's over to the right at almost 255, it's just including highlight areas, the brightest brights in the sharpening routine. So if you have something shiny or like this where you just wanted the fur to catch the look of highlights, now I could push the radius way up on that, and sometimes it'll bring out the detail in just your highlights. This works best on water, and I'm going to turn up the amount a little bit. You can't see it as much here. Well, you can with that once I put that up all the way. But if you want a natural look, kind of not going to the end, we'll just bring up a little bit of sharpness in just the highlights to give it a look of sort of light catching, something that's shiny. So I'm going to put these back down to a more photographic level. Okay, so it blends with the rest of the image, and then hit OK. So that's a really great tool for if you've got something off the internet and it's a little fuzzy because it's not high quality. That's a way to bring back the look of high quality sharpness from a camera to your image. So it's a really good one to use when you bring in place a new layer each time if you want a very crisp image. And also if you have something that's a tiny bit out of focus from your digital camera, that can create the illusion that it was not out of focus, that it was originally very crisp. So it's a great tool. And whoops, before I forget, under filters, under blur, there's a whole set of tools that will allow you to do the opposite. So you've also got Gaussian blur, which will allow you to make something look that you have more control over, just like the sharpen tool where you can set the amount of blur. So if something's kind of grainy looking and I just want to blur it a tiny bit, it's a lot of times when you bring a small image in and enlarge it from the internet, it looks grainy. So if you get that look, this is, you know, just changing this blur, the Gaussian blur that gives you the pull menu. The radius menu will allow you to just push this up to blur a few pixels sitting next to one another together to give it a softer look. You can get rid of that graininess that way. So I'm going to cancel that because I wanted the sharpness, but you can see the difference. It's subtle, but you know, when you're piecing a lot of images together, it can make a big difference, especially if you're going to print large. And there's a whole bunch of different blurs here. We'll go through more of them in the future classes. And then also noise is like an automated blur. So if you have something that looks really speckly and it's got maybe even dust in it from a photograph, you can click despeckle or dust and scratches, and that will soften the image just like the blur. So, and it's a smart filter, so it works with the textures that are there. Sometimes it'll pick up the textures in a more intelligent way than just using the Gaussian blur. So that's a nice one to despeckle. And those are all under your filters. And that was under the noise menu. Okay, so one more filter thing, and then we'll probably stop and see if you have any more questions. But I'm going to turn off the deer. And the house, well, actually, I think I'll leave the house on. I'm just gonna go back to the background layer, which is the grass and sky. That's my foundation layer. And then just drag it up so it fills the whole screen. So I don't have that gap on the top. And then I'm gonna try to find that house layer. Okay. So here was the original image for the foundation layer. So if I wanted to change this, maybe blur the whole thing out so it just drops to the back, I could do that. Or I could select a different filter to add a different, more surrealistic looking dramatic texture. So this is a fun menu to work with, the filter gallery. If I click on that, it's going to bring me into a large sub menu where my image is enlarged over to the right, I mean the left, and then the menu choices are over to the right. So this is just a preview. Again, you have to approve of it before you save any changes in this menu. So over in the bottom left-hand corner, there's a tiny number, 100%, and then a plus and a minus next to it. If I want to zoom out so I can see more of the image, I could just click the minus, or I could change the number here. If I want to zoom back in, I click the plus. So you can see how it's looking in a detailed scale by zooming in. So I'm going to zoom out so you can see the whole image. And then you have all these different folders of brushes over to the right in these submenus to the submenu. So these are fun to use. The artistic menus apply to the full color palette. So depending on what your current paint color is, whoops, and I can't pull it over to look right now, but underneath the bottom of the toolbar, you'll have your current paint color. This one, colored pencil, and a lot of these are taking that as a cue to how to apply the color. So it's taking my current paint color and applying it to the background and then simplifying it so it has this printmaking kind of etched look, which is kind of interesting. And then there's cutout, which simplifies the whole grayscale and color scale. So, oops, let me see if I can move that. Oops, there we are. And it has the number of levels. That means the number of colors, really. So you can add more to create an image that's more realistic. And this is a nice tool for painters too, because you can kind of visualize how to simplify an image if you want that look when you're painting from an image and then print it out as an example. You can also plan silk screens. The artist Shepard Fairey that we looked at that used borrowed images to create those big black and red political posters used this tool, or one like it in Illustrator, to simplify the image. So he could actually pick out the separate colors, because I have so few here, and then add a separate silk screen mask to it when he built his screens from it. So that's a very useful filter. And I'll just go through a few of these. Some exaggerate backgrounds. They're trying to imitate paint tools. This one adds grain to it, film grain, if you want something to look automated, more grainy. And every single one of these filter choices has a menu, sub-menu over to the right that allows you to customize it even further. So if I want to go full grain, which I really like for this image, I'll probably end up leaving that in the future. You can push that up. And also the intensity is 10%. So you can spend all day forever using these filters because there's so many ways you can change up the image. Palette knife is supposed to look like a simplified painting style. Then there's this plastic wrap, which gets, it can be very convenient. This is a nice way to add highlights on waves, or if you have water to sharpen it up. It gets really overused. You see portraits done like this all the time by various illustrators, and you just know it's Photoshop right away, but you can use it in a subtle way that works for you without screaming Photoshop. And this is designed to look like pastels. Some are more effective than others. I like that grain tool, the film grain, to kind of send something into the background and just look like a texture. So that's probably what I would choose here if I was looking for a finished filter for this particular image that I'm layering. But then there's a whole nother brush strokes, which pick up the edges of things. So, you know, while you're working on your layered image for the homework that we're going to look at next week, because we had 2 weeks to work on it, you know, try using some of these filters in certain layers. You can only be in one layer at a time when you're using these filters unless you flatten your image first. But they're fun to work with, and using different ones on different layers you can do. This one is also nice glass to kind of send something to the background of an image or look kind of faded or sentimental. The ocean ripple too, it's just, you know, merging the pixels in different ways and different patterns so you get the illusion of water or glass. Or, you know, water on a window glass. You'll see a lot of the stock images done this way with the ripple or the glass set way up and then putting a few little droplets on it to look like there's something coming down the pane of glass, which is a nice illusion. Glow just puts a glow around the edge of something. And if I had a brighter color picked, this is another example. Here I have this kind of green. But if I had a bright color picked, it would be much more effective for this particular diffuse glow filter, which can be really interesting too, kind of making something look like it's, you know, either glared out by the sun or fading into the background. And we'll go through these all again. They just have fun with them. Just go up to filters and filter gallery and try them out. There's all these others that create kind of just a grayscale monochromatic effect, depending again on the first color you have chosen. If you want to see this in black and white, make sure that you choose black as your paint color or white. But they're designed to look like pen and ink kind of drawing style. And this one's really nice. I like this graphic pen a lot because you can create something that really does look like it's drawn with pen and ink with just a simple photo. So that's probably my favorite tool in this whole grouping is the graphic pen. And you can change the light dark balance. And you could also create something with this and take it right to a printmaking plate. If you are doing printmaking, it's a great tool for converting a photographic image into something that's printable as a graphic. Halftone screen, same kind of thing. Just with blockier pixels. And a lot of these work great for printmaking. But that one in particular, that graphic pen, because it just simplifies it into 2 colors. This one too, torn edges. If you want a more graphic look, you can go straight to a printmaking plate. Okay, stylize. It just has this glowing edges. This is another one of those. It's cool, but you see it all the time. It screams Photoshop, but you can try it. It just picks up the edges and adds a glow brightness to it with a little blend. And I'm not sure why people use it so much, but yeah, it's an interesting filter. And texture, again, creates the illusion of, in this case, not glass or a shiny texture. It's creating the illusion of a dry texture, like a grain or a mosaic. So if you don't like the shiny sort of glossy look of the other ones, this is another good way to get an overall kind of texture that has some pattern to it. And you can create the illusion of this being on paper, like being print on a heavy paper. The tile is good for that. Maybe a really heavy watercolor paper. Then if I print this out on smooth printmaking paper, it would give that illusion. Stained glass is really nice. It's another one of those Photoshop filters that people use too much and you see all the time, but again, it can be really interesting to dissect the grayscale and color relationships by looking at this and seeing exactly how your image is simplified down and where your shadows lie. And it's a nice looking effect. I mean, even if they are something that people use all the time, you can incorporate it into a layered image and make it original. You can always, you know, don't be afraid to use those. And this is just, again, sort of an overall texture that looks like kind of woven paper or a canvas. And this is set on canvas. A lot of these have subsettings, so I could change that to burlap, brick, different textures. So it's really a texture adder, this whole set, obviously, because it's called textures, but it can be really nice for pre-planning a print. If you don't have, you know, heavy printmaking paper and you want that kind of look to it, you can just create it here and then print it out, and it will give the illusion of being on this kind of paper. So you can apply these one at a time. I'd have to apply this, go back and apply another filter if I wanted to stack some of these effects together. So for this one, I'm just going to go back to grain, push the intensity way up and the contrast way down so it just looks like kind of a shadowy image in the background. Actually, I'm going to put that up a little bit and then say okay here. So it's just kind of creating a little bit of unity among the colors because it simplified the grayscale and added a texture to it. It may or may not work with this particular layer stack. I'm going to put this back up here. Whoop. Okay. But it may help to kind of bring the deer forward. There's that guy. I actually do like it better with that deer. And then when I put all the layers and reactivate all of them, I think that could probably work just to sort of create the illusion that that's dropping back. But it might just be obliterated by all the layers that I had here to make the house. And we'll look at next week this technique where you can create a mask and drop an image into a graphic area like this. That takes some pre-planning, so I don't want to add it on to this whole lesson this week, but we'll definitely do that next week. Bird, house. I don't like the house. It's probably going to go, but back up to the weird deer there. Okay, so I kind of like it like that for now. I'm going to leave it. I do like the texture, just kind of sent that grass back into the background. And because the deer's legs are so weird and black and there's kind of shadows emanating from them that are pretty black too, it looks more like the deer belongs there in that grass setup. So I'm going to leave it. I may just go to the house and then turn the opacity down a little bit on that to see if I can get that to drop to the background, or even try a different mode to let some of the mountains show through on that to see if it would be more interesting, because I really, I don't love the way it looks, so I might get rid of it or shrink it. But just so you can see, you can try all these different modes just by letting your cursor sort of roll over it until you find something that might work with that particular color and grayscale combination that you have. That's not bad in your layer stack. Or even that, I kind of like how the houses look like they're growing out of the mountains. I might leave that. That's pin-like light, which is just dropping out some of the darker darks in a more dramatic way than darken. Okay, so I'm pretty much finished with that for now as a painting to work from. I don't like this over here in the corner. And I'm kind of obsessive compulsive, as you could probably tell, but I'm going to go to transform scale and pull that out just so that house is kind of going off the edge, so that's not distracting. Yeah, okay, I like that. So that I could print out now probably on 11 by 17 or 8 by 10 paper, or just work directly from the monitor and use it either as a finished image, but in this case, I'm going to use it for a series of paintings that I've been working on. So I'm going to go ahead and save it as a layered version by just going to save as again to make sure this is the name I want, going in the folder I want. Format Photoshop to save your layers intact for a working file, because I probably will come back and work on this more. Make sure layers is checked. And because I already have one under this name, when I go to save as, it's asking me, do I want to replace it? So I do, I just want to write over the top of it, but Photoshop gives you that chance to, if you don't, to save yourself and change the name. And it's asking me, do I want this to be compatible with future versions of Photoshop? Yes, I do. This image, I'm saying okay. And now I'm going to go back up and save a JPEG image that I can more easily print on a computer if I mail this to myself. On a printer that I have in another building. So I'm going to save as. And this time I'm going back, and you've all done this before, but I'm just repeating it again in case somebody didn't see the two different versions at the beginning. Back to JPEG image, because that's a flattened version. What I see on the screen is what I'm going to get with a JPEG. I won't be able to go back in and use those layers again with this file, but it will give me a small enough image that I can mail it to myself or share it on social media or post it if you want to, when you go to post your images on Blackboard. Because it's putting the JPG extension at the end of the name, it's not going to write over the Photoshop document PSD version of it, because those extensions stay as part of the name. So I'll be safe that I don't have, I didn't write the flattened image over the layered image. So I'm going to save it, and it gives me a submenu that again shows you the quality versus quantity of file size, which is over here in the bottom right-hand corner. So this is 2 megabytes, 2.4 meg, which isn't bad at 9 high quality, but I want this to be best quality to print. So I'm going to put this at 12 maximum, and it's just doubled the size to 5.4 megabytes, which is fine. So I'm going to save that one at standard baseline. You can optimize it for the internet. You will lose some image quality that you might notice in a super high resolution photographic print. And, just to be cautious, I don't want to do that unless I was just dedicating that to being shared on the web. I'm not going to optimize it. So I'll leave it flexible. So just leave baseline standard. And that's just the way the pixels are arranged to give you the best quality image for a particular output. And then okay. So now I have 2 versions, one for print, one working file, which is always a good habit to get into with your images. And that's it. I'm going to stop the share. So any questions? That's a lot of stuff, but I will post the video. And definitely try the layer styles, because those give you control over your shadow and your highlight automatically, your drop shadows. And try using, if your computer can cope with the, the processing, try the lighting effects under filters just for fun. Save your image first before you use that, because it does require the computer, a lot of computation on the computer. It can freeze up the image. So save it first, always with that. And then also try your dodge and burn tool. To me, those are still the best way to get a believable looking shadow with a directional light source, by using dodge to light and highlight areas and burn to create shadow areas. And anyway, so I think we'll end at that point, because that's a lot for this week. Next week, we'll look at your images that you've created for the 4th assignment, the Surrealist Collage in full color, the Dream Collage, and talk about those. So I did put a new discussion question. I just sent out the email around noon, so you may not have gotten that today, but for next week, answer that. Add your images. They don't have to be finished. You can put up your work in process to the discussion question, and we'll look at more of your work. If you have any trouble during the week, you can email me and I'll get back to you. And if you need, again, on Tuesday, we'll be doing the optional Zoom, so you can get some extra help then, or anytime you want to do this outside of class is fine if you need some help with some particular problem that's come up. So any questions before we go? Okay, well, thanks for coming in. It's good to see all your names. We're gonna have to do the faces more, but next time. But have a great weekend, and good luck with your work. I'm really looking forward to seeing these images because this is always such a fun project. And
Thank you.
bye. Good to see your work. Thank you so much for sharing it, Kaylee. See you next week. Bye.